Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is very interesting. He is Matt Engel from Paradromics, and he's actually the CEO there and helped found the company back 2 years ago, something like this. And what they are basically broadband for the brain. So massively parallel neural interfaces and real-time decoding. And they're not a research institution. They're not a university or anything like this. It's a company. It's actually a medical device company, medical device startup that's making this in order to being able to connect to the brain. And what they're talking about is having 50,000 electrodes, 50,000 connections. So it's really quite a nice step up from what we've been seeing recently. And so lots of interesting information, always nice to have a different perspective in this field. And we'll talk more on the other side.
We see one of the fundamental issues about interfacing with the brain is that neurons are slow. By silicon standards, neurons are very slow. If you wanted to peg an effective clock cycle on a neuron, you might say it's something like less than 1 kilohertz. That means that there's no high-speed data bus in the brain. So if you want to get a lot of data in and out, you have to access a lot of neurons independently. And really, you want to be able to record action potentials with millisecond precision. When we looked at the technologies that were available to do that, we thought that actually electrical recording, particularly microwire recording, is a really great way to get signals out. But the problem was just that it didn't scale very well. So the scaling factor was how many graduate students did you have that could solder individual microwires to contacts on a PCB? And obviously that's not very good. So we were looking at ways that you could bundle up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of wires in parallel, and then read them out without having to individually connect to every single wire. And the idea actually came, it wasn't originally ours. Dean Scribner at the Naval Research Lab had a really cool paper describing a retinal prosthesis where he made arrays of nanowires and nanochannel glass and then bonded them to CMOS chips. And we looked at that and thought that was a really cool idea, and we could refine that a little bit and extend it to higher aspect ratio structures that could be used for cortical recording or even deep brain recording.
Yeah, I was just reading an article saying something that it's based on 1960s era technology developed in the small country of Moldova.
Yeah, the wires that we're using are amazing. They can be 10 microns in diameter. The inner conductor can be on the order of 1 to 5 microns, and you can pull them and they can be continuous and conductive for kilometers and kilometers. And the technology to make this kind of wire was invented in the 60s, really, in the Soviet Union. Moldova was actually like a really interesting research center in the Soviet Union. And then, unfortunately, when the Soviet Union collapsed, this research institute became privatized, and it was all kinds of messiness. Actually, I think they've sorted some of that out now, and they're still. It's a company called Illyri, and they're producing the wire commercially. Anyone can buy it, but unfortunately, not a lot of people know about it.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like a brush. I mean, this was the problem, I think, with early electricity experiments is basically you want an insulated wire, you're gonna have to make it, and so Faraday, when he just trying to prove magnetism and electricity were correlated, he had to make his own conductive wire with an insulator, and that's it's not now it's very easy because you can just go and buy it at the hardware store for like $1 or $2, but back then you had to make it, and so it sounded like this is exactly where science is right now, or this is what you're solving, is basically saying, hey, let's not just throw more hands into this, throw more graduate students into this, but let's actually make something that's sustainable and mass manufacturable as well, huh?
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Okay, so what are the details? I mean, what were some of the numbers again? Like how many of these brushes do you have, and how does it work, I guess?
So we're looking at a roughly 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter area for a single module. And on that module, which is a CMOS chip with thousands of wires bonded, there would be between 20 and 50,000 microwires.
Oh, wow.
In our preliminary experiments, a single microwire can record from on the order of 3 to 5 neurons. So we've proposed to DARPA for their speech prosthesis application to build a system with 4 modules that would tile the superior temporal gyrus and record from up to 1 million neurons.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, that's really amazing, because right now, I mean, it's basically, okay, so BlackRock Microsystems has the Utah electrode array. That's, 96 electrodes. And we actually I just had an interview last week with basically systems that have, on one probe, have like up to 1,000. But this is excellent. I mean, this is, 20, 50 times more and potentially 100 times more. So how is this possible?
Well, I think that when people look back, they're going to ask why it didn't happen sooner. I mean, there's nothing really fundamental going on here. We're arranging the microwires in a grid and bonding them onto some sophisticated CMOS electronics. I mean, there's some subtlety in the electronics themselves. For instance, the system that we're building right now, which is just for research purposes and for use in acute animal experiments, that has 65,000 channels and produces roughly 24 gigabits per second. And in order to dissipate the heat just associated with digitization, the head stage, the unit that the sort of wires ultimately connect to, has to be about the size of a Nalgene bottle. And so to have something like that implanted in the brain, we had to do a few clever things in the pixel design to do some inline compression before digitization. But, I mean, at its core, the architecture is very simple. It's just a brush of wires.
Yeah, so how do you handle this kind of data? I mean, that's incredible.
So our strategy is to try to throw out as much data as possible in the beginning, because digitization costs a lot of energy and it means it dissipates a lot of heat. So you really want to extract the features of the data that are important and pass along those and pass along nothing else. And so the engineers here at Paradromics, along with a Belgian CMOS design company, Kailesti, we've been working on ways to do principal component analysis in analog circuitry so that we can use a very tried and true method of spike waveform feature extraction and then reduce the data by roughly a factor of 160-fold by only transmitting the first 3 principal components. Essentially, what our approach has been is there's this analysis pipeline that you would normally do after you had digitized the data in order to extract the meaningful features. But rather, we realized that we can instantiate that in analog electronics instead. That makes a significant difference for the system design. It means that we have to digitize much less data. It means that we can suddenly make 1 million neurons in vivo a workable solution.
So is this heat dissipation, the Nalgene bottle, is that before or after?
So the Nalgene bottle, right, that's our research system that we're releasing next year. And that is that's where the sort of bundle of wires connects to a relatively large box. The system's not implantable, so there's conventional digitization going on there. When the CMOS chip that reads out the voltages on the bundle is basically just a passive unit that amplifies the signal and passes it along. There's no real processing going on there.
Cool. Well, I'm curious about this process of getting into this. I mean, this company's been around for 2 years, if I'm correct, and you studied in Heidelberg, Carnegie Mellon, and everything like this. So how did you go from doing postdoctoral work to starting quite a revolutionary company?
Yeah. So some of the work that I'm describing has started off at the Max Planck Institute in Heidelberg with my thesis advisor, Andreas Schaefer. We were looking at methods for intracellular recording using metal electrodes, and then we started looking at ways to scale up that type of recording. And that's when we got very interested in the Moldovan company Aliri and looking at the work of Dean Scribner and starting to put the pieces together. And then that was more of a side project, and I went on to do a postdoc at Stanford in a slightly related area, kept in touch with my old group, and then eventually, we started getting the idea that this idea of scaling up large numbers of metal microwires was in and of itself really interesting. And as we started thinking about how to do it and started working on preliminary experiments to prove out the concept, we realized that, one, it wasn't really a project that was suitable for academia. It had a lot of moving parts, a lot of mini projects to work on that weren't in and of themselves very exciting to publish, but were necessary to bring the whole thing together. And we realized that if we could do it, it would be extremely valuable, not just as a way of recording and stimulating neurons for research purposes, but also as a backbone for a whole new neuroprosthetics industry. When we started really thinking about what it would mean to be able to get a lot of data in and out of the brain. And that was really the genesis of Paradromics. So I left my postdoc at Stanford and started Paradromics, and then immediately began recruiting everyone that I knew to come and work here.
That's incredible. Yeah, that can be quite a gutsy move to leave something that's safe and secure and go into the unknown. But the question of money, did you fund, or did you get you're in Silicon Valley, so did you get venture capital, or how did this work exactly?
Well, we found some angel investors and one venture capitalist that would support us in what's called a convertible note round. So we raised $3 million over the first 2 years in this in the form of a convertible note, which is basically a debt that will convert into stock during the Series A financing. We got a grant from the NIH, which was really helpful in validating our technology and getting us up and running to build the neuroscience research system. And then just in April of this year, we got this $18 million contract from DARPA, which is a huge boost for us. And now we're actually actively looking to raise our Series A.
Yeah, that $18 million would be nice. By the way, Neural Implant Podcast is looking for a new microphone for the low, low price of $1 million. So how many people did you have during this time? And I don't know. I don't want to pry too much into the financials, but yeah, how did you keep afloat? And I mean, I'm very curious about this, because also, this is the benefit of having a podcast. Like, the questions that I want to ask, I can ask, and I would like to start a company one day, and so I'm very curious. What tips do you have as well?
Well, I think the most important thing that happened is at the time that we were getting very interested in starting a company, I had the fortune of meeting Adam Kablanian and Lou Zhang. And Adam is a serial entrepreneur who started a company, Virage Logic, in the late 90s, and it became the leading supplier of memory IP cores. And it was purchased by Synopsys for something like $300 million in the 2000s. And he was just sort of selling off another company that he had been CEO of and was looking to do something meaningful and try to leverage his skills and his connections to build something really substantial, and was kind of looking around. And then he met us, and he also got really excited about the idea of building a new industry of neuroprosthetics and helping a lot of people. So he came on and became our chairman of the board and helped us to raise our first round of angel funding. At that same time, we met Lou Zhang, who is a venture capitalist at NewGen Capital. I think it's now called Fusion Capital. And she also saw what was admittedly a really rough pitch deck and a group of young people who were just coming out of academia and didn't know much about business. And she saw potential in us, and she also contributed to that initial fundraising round. And we didn't raise all the money at once. We had a first tranche of money that was about $1 million, and then we raised another $750,000 9 months later, and then we raised $1.2 million a few months ago. And so it came in tranches, and at each step the company accomplishes something, de-risks a little bit of the future of the company, and then more money comes in. And if you know anything about startups and Silicon Valley, of course, there's this valuation aspect, which is that the safer your company looks, the more valued it is, the more money you can raise, giving away less equity in the company. And so that's what the process looks like.
Yeah, I know the process. I've watched the TV series Silicon Valley, so I know all about it. I'm an expert now. It's hilarious, by the way, for anybody in the audience who hasn't seen it. I think it's quite educational as well. But yeah, that's really interesting. So basically, in the beginning, okay, so you got the $1 million. Okay, so how much of that was going towards like jet skiing in the Bahamas versus like equipment costs versus like personnel costs?
Oh, all of it. I mean, that's why we needed to raise money so soon. The jet skiing just increased our burn rate to unacceptable levels. No, I mean, in most cases, personnel are always the major cost, and then for sort of deep technology companies, there are also these capital equipment costs for building things. But in our case, as almost every other company I know, it's the people that cost the most money. So one of the things that companies, when they're first starting off, they try to keep the headcount as low as possible, try to do as much as they can with as few people as possible. We've been lucky that we have a lot of very versatile scientists and engineers that can wear different hats, and that's facilitated it for us.
Okay, so what did it look like the first few years? Like, what were you doing?
Well, our office is in a warehouse district of San Jose. We share this building with an organic cracker factory and a medical marijuana dispensary and a daycare.
Well, all your employees' needs are taken care of.
On the other hand, we're walking distance from Costco, and we rarely see any cockroaches outside anymore. So things are looking up. No, I mean, we moved away from the Stanford Palo Alto area to San Jose because it's much cheaper. Sort of, you wouldn't be particularly impressed if you pulled into the parking lot, but you come in and actually I think it's fair to say we're a cutting edge neurotechnology company, and so it's pretty exciting inside.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. So outside of the jet skiing in the Bahamas, there's really not much glamour associated with this. Probably more in the postdoc life, right?
I can tell you definitively there's no glamour in the postdoc life.
Okay. So of the meager glamour that there is in both of them, which if you had to like weigh a grain of sand, versus, I don't know, a piece of dust, which one is heavier?
It's really exciting to be out on your own. And I've been lucky that a lot of my friends came with me, and a lot of really great people have just cold introed to us and come, and we have a great dynamic here. It's pretty exciting, I would say, to be on your own and be in this sort of entrepreneurial experience. I would say more exciting than a postdoc. And
do you think it's for everybody? Would you recommend it for everybody?
I think it depends on people's risk aversion. I mean, there's no. It's what I would say it's well suited for someone who's gone into a PhD trying to get a faculty position. They understand that today the odds of getting a faculty position are really low, and there's a distribution of outcomes where the top performers get a lot and are very happy, and then a lot of people are disappointed and don't get what they want. So to some extent, that's a great preparation for coming to Silicon Valley and doing a startup, because it's a similar profile of reward.
Yeah. You know what? That sounds exactly like me. I was like directly in the middle for my master's, and because of that, I didn't have PhD. Also, I was a little bit more picky with the PhDs, and so now I've had to start a podcast, in order to generate value. But I think it's a little bit better like this. I'd rather go not from the front door where everybody's trying to push through, but climbing through the window or something like this.
But it looks like you're going to have a lot of doors to knock on when you go to do a PhD eventually. I saw the lineup of people that have come to this podcast is really impressive.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also quite impressed. It's quite incredible, I would say. And well, I don't know if I'm already going to be there at this point, but I got invited to the Society for Neuroscience conference in Washington, D.C. as a media member. So I was like, ooh, cool. I'm going to get a media hat. Cool. So we've talked a little bit about people who are looking to become entrepreneurs in this field. Do you have any other recommendations for what they should do? I mean, obviously they have to have an idea, or do you think put themselves together with somebody that has an idea, find money, and then, jet skiing in Bahamas?
Well, I think it just depends if the kind of entrepreneur that you want to be. I mean, I know a lot of people, especially out here, who just want to start a company. That's what they've always wanted to do. They always want to be part of a company. It doesn't really matter to them so much what kind of company they start. I wouldn't really know how to advise someone like that, because that wasn't really how I felt. That wasn't really the path that I took. I really wanted to build something, and I realized at some point that a company was the best way to build what I wanted to see. So I would say that I took a very different tack than a lot of other entrepreneurs that I've seen here in the Valley. But I would advise people who want to take a path similar to mine that I think it's most important to follow your own interests and your own passions and what you think is going to work, and not get distracted by things that are going on around you. I see a lot of, whether it's entrepreneurs or scientists, a lot of people chasing I say chasing lightning bugs, because if you've ever had the experience of trying to catch lightning bugs, you run after something that's flashing in the sky, but by the time you get there, it's already gone. Whereas the better strategy for catching them actually is to pick a single one, and whether it's blinking or not, continue pursuing it. Little bit about catching lightning bugs, by the way. So in my experience, and when I look at either academics that have been really successful and I respect a lot, or entrepreneurs that have built really great companies, they didn't go into it just thinking, oh, I want to be a professor, or oh, I just want to start a company. They said, I really want to change this, or I really want to build this, and then they pursued it tenaciously.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's really good advice for people wanting, to start a company or anything like this. I think it's good for dating or, relationships as well. Is like, no, I don't want like any girl. I want you, especially you. And I've been following you. I know where your underwear drawer is, and I know everything about you. And that's somehow more endearing, and you might get, I don't know, more responses for something like this. So is this what you're looking for when you hire employees?
I think we're looking for all kinds of people when we hire employees. I mean, that's the most honest answer. Is some people always wanted to be at a startup. Some people at Paradromics have an active aversion to startups and would never have joined a startup if it weren't this exact startup. Yeah, and we have some people come as scientists by background that are motivated by ideas and love to learn about things. Some people come and are purely engineers and love to work on a particular problem and just grind on it. And it works the best, at least it has here, having this very diverse group of people.
I think so too. Like you can attack an angle you can attack a problem from all angles. And this was the shocking thing that I learned during my master's was like, there's people who love the things that you hate, so like differential equations and just like, I don't know, this crazy theoretical math. There's some people that love it and I hate it. And I'm just like, more power to you. You go work on that and I'll go work on the thing that I like.
You go make friends with those people.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually what I did was I would have them tutor me before the exam and literally an hour of tutoring before, and they had already like gone through it. They had already figured it out. So when they explained it, I'm like, boom, got it, and got a decent score after very little studies. So I'm curious. Well, first of all, how many employees do you have?
We have 8 full-time employees.
Are you guys already selling a product? Or are you guys still developing it? And do you have to do FDA approval for this as well?
Well, our first product is only for animal research, and we're going to release that in roughly the March-April timeframe next year. So that doesn't require any FDA approval. That's something that we'll be selling directly to science labs.
Yeah, I had a project in my bachelor's for animal medical device, but you need like IACUC or like approval or something like this. It's still like maybe easier than humans, but it's still kind of a lengthy process, isn't it?
Generally, the labs themselves universities have a local IACAC, and then the labs, when they want to do animal experiments, they apply, they put in an application, and then that's an internal process to that institution. So it's not like the FDA where we would have our particular device approved and then anyone would use it. It's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, animal research is subject to regulation as well.
So sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say as well after that?
I don't remember. Oh, I know what. Now I know what I was going to say. I was going to talk about the big show, the Niobe, the neural input-output bus. This is what we're all really excited about, building this implantable chip as this data link for advanced neural prosthetics. And that will require FDA approval. And I think anyone who says that they can build a high data rate neural interface without requiring FDA approval is either in possession of knowledge that is worthy of a Nobel Prize or is mistaken, because to get high data rate brain-machine interface, you need to open the brain. And there's currently no feasible proposal to do large-scale single neuron interrogation without opening up the skull.
Okay, so this is a data bus, like a processor or something like this, but it would go inside the brain or inside the skull?
Yeah, it's essentially a broadband modem for the brain. And if you can imagine getting information in and out of particular areas of the brain, if you're in motor cortex, suddenly you have a advanced motor prosthetic. If you're in visual cortex, you have a visual prosthetic so that you can input a visual stream directly into the brain. There are you could be in auditory cortex, You could be in speech cortex. Right now we're building a device for DARPA that will go in the superior temporal gyrus, which is an area that represents speech, so that someone who can no longer speak can imagine speech, and it will be produced audibly by microphone.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. So it's quite versatile technology then, huh?
Exactly, yeah. It's a modular system, and the only thing that's application specific is where you put the device and what software you're running on the back end.
So how is this possible? Because I think so I did an internship at BlackRock Microsystems, so I know, that's basically the technology that I know, but that seemed to be mostly in the motor cortex. I'm not exactly sure why, maybe like the depth or the height of the probes or something like this, but why is yours more versatile?
I don't think that the BlackRock Microsystems are intrinsically limited to motor cortex. It's just that for the applications that they were pursuing for individuals with tetraplegia or ALS, the most obvious first application is motor. For someone who, I think the people who stand to benefit the most from a brain-machine interface are people who are locked in, who can't speak or move, who currently can only communicate with the world through eye blinks, or people who are tetraplegic, who are immobilized. This is the group of people that would benefit most from a neural implant, and then that increased quality of life offsets the risks of surgery. And I think that's the reason why you're seeing the first neuroprosthetic applications in that area. And indeed, I think that those people would be the ones who would be first served by Paradromics technology as well.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody wants to have a horribly invasive brain surgery in order to tweet, something faster on Twitter or something like this.
And at the moment, right, 96, if you think of BlackRock Microsystems, 96 electrodes, that wouldn't be a very good visual prosthesis. You wouldn't really want a 96 pixel image. You'd probably hold out for a few more channels. And I think maybe that's why you see, at the moment, the bandwidth is just so limited that there's a very limited set of applications. And I think that just increasing the bandwidth, just increasing the data rate is going to have a huge effect on neuroprosthetics. I mean, if you look at, this is a bit of an analogy, but if you look at what was going on with the internet and in, let's say, the late 90s and where it is now, Netflix was founded in 1997, and it was a company that shipped DVDs around the world. And, you sort of open it up and you wonder if it's scratched or if it has someone's thumbprint on it or something. And it was not a technically innovative company at its founding. And it was 10 years before it started streaming high definition video and became the Netflix that everyone's familiar with now. And it's not that there was some sort of genius idea of distributing high definition video or streaming video. It's just that there wasn't enough home internet bandwidth. Not enough people had enough connection speed to do that in 1997. Bandwidth transformed the way people use the internet. Right now, I think something like 35% of internet bandwidth is used by Netflix alone. I mean, it's insane the way that sort of just this sort of bandwidth trend has changed the way people are using their internet connections. And we see that there's going to be something very similar with neuroprosthetics. Basically, the application space for neuroprosthetics is limited by bandwidth. And it's not limited by people's creativity. There are immediately hundreds of applications that you could go for. There are hundreds of medical indications that would benefit from brain-machine interface technology. Everyone already knows what you would build. It's just that the bandwidth in currently available systems sucks. There's nothing you can do with it. And it doesn't, the sort of utility to the patient, the efficacy doesn't merit brain surgery. And that's kind of what I think that we're changing with the technology that we're introducing.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're in agreement here. Like, the technology hasn't caught up, and also there's not enough money behind it. I mean, theoretically, you could have streamed high def movies even in 1997, but it would have been very, very expensive. But now like the technology has caught up, so it's a lot less expensive. But still, there's billions and billions of dollars and lots of brains working on this, lots of people, very smart people putting together a very, very good system. And I think that's what's definitely necessary is exactly what you're doing is have a self-sustaining model where it can grow, and you're not, you don't have to go for alms to the government every year, like, please sir, may I have some more grant money?
Well, it's also the case that in our assessment, individually, every component of the system that we're building has been technically proved out. There's no fundamental new research that has to be done to build brain-machine interfaces. It's not like quantum computing where you're sort of laying the track in front of the train and you're just kind of hoping that it goes somewhere. I mean, there are a lot of fundamental science still that's standing in front of, say, like fusion, using fusion to provide power to the world, or quantum computing, or those would be two examples. But I think that brain-machine interfaces is much more similar to, for instance, building an electric car or building a self-driving car. All of the core technologies are there. Someone just has to come in and integrate it and do it in a way that services a market that, as you said, can become self-sustaining. And we think that all of the key ingredients, and we think the timing is right. And so we're very optimistic.
Yeah, that's probably why Elon Musk is interested in it as well. That's pretty much his MO, is develop these things that already, have a pretty stable platform. And that's something that one of the first guests, Jens Naumann, who was actually the first person to be implanted with this visual prosthetic. But that was back in like 2000, 2001, something like this. And he expressed, big frustration that there hasn't really been that much progress in the last, 15, 17 years, something like this. And I mean, literally the technology, I mean, this is kind of my analysis, is the technology that we were using then is more or less the technology that we're using now. And it's a shame, because if you look at the internet or computing or anything else 17 years ago, it was not where we are now.
And actually, you've probably seen this, but Stevenson Cording published a paper about how scaling brain technologies will affect our understanding of neuroscience. And one of the things they did was they plotted the number of channels, the maximum number of channels that could be recorded as a function of year. And they found that whereas let's say Moore's law, I think the processing power doubles something like every 18 months. I think bandwidth trend is the home internet bandwidth doubles every 2 years. In neural recording, the trend has been that the number of channels doubles every 7.4 years.
Wow, that's quite sad.
So I think that there have been some issues in experimental neuroscience in general, trying to scale up our ability to interact with single neurons. But I think one of the other reasons why there hasn't been a lot of capital pouring in previously to brain-machine interfaces is structural problems related to how companies get funding and what types of investors will invest in, say, what are perceived as deep technology companies or medical device companies. So medical device investors are not very adventurous. They like to invest in things like stents and valves, not complicated devices. And by the same token, companies that like to invest in deep technology are often scared off by FDA approval, which in some ways is actually the wrong way to think about it, because FDA approval, devices that require pre-market approval actually make a lot more money than those that don't, for the reason that pre-market approval is a huge barrier to entry. So it's actually the wrong way, in my opinion, the wrong way to think about it. But there are, again, these structural problems in the field, very similar to the structural problems that, let's say, Elon Musk had to overcome when he was launching Tesla. The industries that for no rational reason or for nefarious reasons don't want to see innovation happen. But I think that in the last maybe 2 years, everyone's mindset about this has started to change.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's probably the visibility that this DARPA program has brought, that Elon has brought, that Brian Johnson, founding kernel, has brought, and Obama Brain Initiative, I think, was also extremely helpful in focusing. It didn't necessarily create that much more money, but it focused money in developing new neurotechnologies and got the field thinking about that as an important bottleneck in neuroscience research and development of new therapeutics.
What do you think is still necessary in order to really, really have this, 10x in speed, 10x accelerate?
Well, we think that we can have 1,000x increase in speed, and I think what's required is funding, focus, and just high quality engineering. But I don't think there's anything really fundamental that remains.
Okay, so I know you've had to pitch this to investors, and I don't know if you're comfortable talking about this, but what's the kind of prospects for maybe your company or this field or something like this, the financial, like in terms of growth and everything like this?
Yeah, so I see the way this field is going to grow is there's going to be an initial biomedical market. I estimate on the order of $1 billion, maybe a little bit more, people who have very severe speech and motor deficits. Someone like, for instance, Stephen Hawking, where the marginal benefit of being able to move around and live more autonomously, to communicate freely, would be so valuable that brain surgery would be an obvious choice. I think that when there are tens of thousands of people who have had brain implants for a few years, everything's going to start changing. Suddenly, other, for instance, sensory deficits like blindness and hearing loss will be more obvious application areas. And I think that what we'll see is that the $1 billion market will grow into a $10 billion market as people, let's say, who are wheelchair bound become interested in being able to walk through the use of a brain-machine interface. And then it'll turn into a $30 billion market when someone who is blind or deaf decides to get a brain implant to supplement their sensory capabilities. And then at that point, when you'll have on the order of 1 million people with brain implants, I think their world could be a very different place. And then I think people will start asking, what are the other applications for the technology?
So basically make an equivalent of cochlear implant for the eyes, for the arms, for the speaking, everything like this. And cochlear implants have been around for a long time. You know, just last week saw somebody with one implanted.
But I think we can do much better than cochlear implants. I mean, they're on the order of 24 electrodes. It's really impressive. To be honest, for as old as the technology is, it's really impressive that people can learn to use those and recognize speech on the telephone. I think that's more of a testament to neural plasticity and to the people who are using the devices than it is to the devices themselves.
Absolutely agreed. We should have like implants that are, you know, better than real life, you know. So my favorite example is Geordi LaForge of Star Trek Enterprise or Star Trek Next Generation, where he sees like all the spectrum, radio waves, ultraviolet, everything.
Yeah, there's nothing unphysical about proposing that.
So okay, so my recent obsession or like recent interest has been bioelectronic medicine. So basically implanting into the peripheral nervous system, and then from that being able to control organs, even inflammatory control. I see this kind of as being a near term thing and potentially having more money as well, because it would disrupt the $1.4 trillion pharmaceutical industry. And it would be, I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but definitely it's much better than, you know, flooding your body with chemicals and then hoping that, you know, something happens, like, I don't know, your heart rate goes down or something like this. Why not just like directly hack into that? And this technology sounds pretty versatile. Have you thought about going into bioelectronic medicine instead of, you know, drilling into the brain?
Well, I think there are two aspects of that. One is I 100% agree with the idea that I think neuropharmaceuticals have hit a wall. There's only so much specificity that you can build into a chemical. And I mean, we're seeing that now. And even most of the drugs that are used to treat cognitive and psychiatric disorders, their mechanisms aren't that well understood. So I completely agree with the idea of electroceuticals coming in as a much more specific therapeutic. I can't really comment on peripheral applications. I know you had Doug on the program a few weeks ago, and he's knows much more about this than I do. I also GlaxoSmithKline has a fund, Action Potential, that is specifically looking at funding companies in the, let's say, peripheral electroceutical space. And I know there's a lot of interest there, partially because it's easier. It's easier, it's less invasive than going into the brain. But I don't think that it's going to cover every possible application. I mean, there are some indications, let's say, schizophrenia, depression, where you are probably not going to have an intervention that doesn't involve direct interrogation of the central nervous system. It seems highly unlikely that you're going to treat those disorders by tapping into the vagal nerve, for instance. But I think that there are a lot of really interesting applications in sort of motor prosthetics for someone who has an amputation, or treating the sort of brain-gut axis. It's not my area of expertise, but I also think it's very exciting.
Okay. So you guys aren't focusing on that at all then?
No, that's not really where our strength lies. I think that there are a lot of exciting things to be done there, but our device is specifically meant to be a broadband modem for the brain and the central nervous system. And that's where we've been focusing our energies.
Could it be used for a vagus nerve stimulation?
I think a lot of our component technologies could be used. Like, for instance, some of the CMOS that we've been developing, a lot of the components could be repackaged into a form factor that could be used for peripheral nerves. A lot of people have asked us the same question. Yeah, I think the answer is yes. Probably a lot of what we're doing could be reused in that setting.
Cool. I hope to be leading this charge hopefully one day. So what's a big mistake or wrong direction that some researchers, or I don't know, some people in this business of brain machine interfaces, what's the wrong direction you think they might be going down?
Before I think of a technical wrong direction, I would say one wrong reaction that I've seen from a lot of peers and colleagues has been, we've seen a lot of hype in the news associated with, where brain-machine interfaces might go. And I've seen a lot of reaction from colleagues saying, we're nowhere near having advanced neuroprosthetics. We don't understand anything about the brain. We're decades and decades away. But I think that reaction is wrong, is pretty fundamentally wrong, to say that we would need a complete understanding of the brain before we could build functional neuroprosthetics. I think that's a false dichotomy that scientists should stay away from. I think it's maybe a reaction to some of the hype and some of the unphysical ideas that are being promoted right now, and a lot of them are flying around Silicon Valley. But I think that that's the wrong reaction, because if you look at, for instance, the development of vaccines were saving millions of lives far before the molecular mechanisms for sort of antibody diversity generation were understood. There are a lot of things that can be done empirically. That's how medical science has advanced. So I think and even just looking at the specifics of how, let's say, like motor prosthetics work, you don't need to understand need to understand how the motor cortex works at a finely mechanistic level to use large-scale recording in motor cortex to drive control of a prosthetic device. You just don't need that. I mean, a lot of the algorithms that are used to decode neural data are agnostic to the neural mechanisms themselves. It's more of a machine learning field. I think we should all embrace that there's a path forward with the technology that exists today and our understanding of the brain today that can lead to really revolutionary patient outcomes in the next years, and not get hung up on a level of description of the brain that is unnecessary for clinical progress in the next decade. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I think that's really important as a scientific community for us to embrace, that we can have a lot of impact now, and that you don't have to solve every aspect of the system that you study in order to develop a really useful therapeutic.
I would agree. I mean, I would say it's almost like putting the cart in front of the horse. Actually, this is the secret. This is the dirty secret of science, is that science usually follows after everything else. Like, science is usually the last ones to come along and like clean everything up and be like, okay, here's the theories, this is how it works. And it's usually after the years of practice or years of actually doing something that science actually comes in and cleans it up. And I think if science was leading the way, then it would be potentially a century before the levels of that they would reach the levels of understanding of the brain.
I don't really want to go that far. I wouldn't say that we should just sort of like plow into the unknown. But I think my point is that we actually do know a lot about how sensory and motor systems work, and we have there's a lot that we could build today.
But why not plow into the unknown? I mean, if you have willing volunteers who know the risks, then what's the problem?
I think that has a lot of challenges associated with it.
So okay, this is something that's been on my mind a lot is regulatory arbitrage. So like going somewhere that's like more open, where it's legal to, I don't know, have volunteers or something like this, do brain implants, test it out there, then bring it back to the FDA, and you have a tried and tested product. So the FDA process would be really fast theoretically. What do you think about something like this?
I mean, I think in practice, a lot of companies will go for the CE mark in Europe before they come to get FDA approval. But I think what you're describing is a lot different and potentially a lot more dangerous, depending on a lot of countries for economic or strategic reasons would potentially lower the bar for regulatory approval to attract companies to come in and do research. But that can lead to some really shady decisions and outcomes.
Okay, so you think if you set up a, I don't know, testing facility in Botswana, for example, in South Africa, in Southern Africa, that it would maybe even hurt your chances of being approved later on?
I think it's just I think that's irresponsible.
Well, it's just kind of an idea. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. I think that seems to be a big.
No, I think as a thought experiment, yeah, I understand it, but I think also looking back at the history of medical science and some of the mistakes that have been made, let's say it's not a new idea. People have thought along those lines, and it's led to some dark places. So I don't really know of any I don't know of any companies or any groups that are thinking along those lines for brain implants.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that's a big reason I see this, as you said, 7.5 year doubling rate of neural probes. I think a big part of that is the regulation. I mean, like a lot of paraplegic people, they'd be like, yeah, let's try it out. But if you have to have all these regulations and everything like this, it could be a problem. But yeah, I guess if you have it open too, it could be make sure that nothing's shady. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Okay, this has been a really cool conversation. Who do you recommend that we should reach out to, talk to, listen to, read, learn about? Who should I have on the podcast as well?
I really think that you should invite Conrad Cording to come on and talk about some of the computational aspects of neural decoding and his perspective on scaling in neuroscience. I think that would be a very interesting conversation. I don't know if you have you talked to Robert Gaunt, Krishna Shenoy, Andy Schwartz. It might be interesting to talk to some of the Utah Array crowd, people who have been doing clinical work with the Utah Array and have really been pioneering a lot of what's going on in neuroprosthetics. John Donahue would be a great person to talk to.
Thank you. If people want to find out more about you or get in contact, how do they do that?
They can find out a lot about us on the webpage, paradromics.com.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that. Yeah, I guess I apologize a little bit because I really like this kind of stuff. I really like this startup space. And as I said, I watched the show Silicon Valley. I highly recommend it, by the way. It's hilarious. So this is what I've known, or what I think I've known, that I want to do for at least like 5 years or something like this. So I nerded out a little bit, but maybe this is what it sounds like. Maybe this is what Neural Implant Podcast sounds like when normal people, non-scientists listen to it, like people just nerding out about it. Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting. I was very happy to have the first non-academic on the show. I mean, we did have Timothy Marzullo of Backyard Brains, but I mean, I don't want to. This is not meant to be an offense. It's kind of a toy. It's kind of a demonstration. It's not an actual it's definitely not a medical device, I would say. So it was good to have somebody from the medical device field on. Yeah. So I thought this was really interesting. And in the startup side of the medical device companies as well. We have had some companies actually. Man, I'm just stepping all over all kinds of feet right here. Oh man. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I actually hadn't really heard about Paradromics before, I don't know, a few weeks ago or something like this. I think somebody recommended it. And yeah, that was really interesting. So, everybody's all, of course, heard of the kernel from Brian Johnson and the neural lace from Elon Musk. But this is kind of stealth mode. And honestly, I don't know, in case, I don't want to say anything bad in case, those other guys come on the show sometime. But to me, it's kind of like hype, that they've been really good at, hitting a nerve in the newspaper articles and being like, oh, this is going to be so cool and getting people excited. But maybe Paradromics is just kind of sneak in and just like take all the market share and, just actually be the successful ones in there while everybody else is on stage talking about how great their company is going to be. Sorry, big generalization. I don't want to offend anybody, because also I'm probably going to meet you guys. I don't want to have any bad blood. I want to be able to go get that beer and be like, okay, let's talk. Let's have our little chicken burger or whatever. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you like these kinds of shows, and yeah, we'll talk more next time.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.